everyone! We're back! Welcome to No Direction Beyond, your Starfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. I'm your host, Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param. I'm joined by my other hosts.
Alexander Agunis, the Everyman Gamer.
I'm James, I write Code Switch.
And as a very special guest, we have from Paizo Inc., Amanda Hamon-Kunz. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on, Param.
Awesome. And we are so glad to have you on. We've a secret that's not such a secret. We've been trying to get you on the show for months now, so it's super awesome that we finally get you on. And for those of you who aren't familiar with you, what's your role with the Starfinder team, and what are some of your past credits?
Sure. So I am the managing developer for Starfinder. That means that the designers and developers for the game are working with me, and I'm overseeing that from a managerial perspective, and working with them on designing the things, planning out the products, looking at the schedule, allocating development resources to make sure that our products are done on time and that they get to the next step of the stage when that's appropriate, and just kind of keeping all the trains running on time, in addition to doing actual on-the-ground development work for manuscripts that kind of fall outside the purview of the larger team's requirements or responsibilities as well. So management stuff, and then also working on the actual material.
That sounds like must be a unique challenge, because Starfinder is Paizo's first attempt at another second project. They have to put together a whole nother team. A lot of this probably had to be invented. So what was that like, getting things going for the first time?
Getting things going for Starfinder, so it was one of those things where it was a big secret that we couldn't really talk about a lot. We were working on Starfinder long before the public knew that Starfinder was going to exist, and we had made hints about, you know, a big announcement that was going to happen in the spring, the year before Starfinder came out, and I think a lot of people assumed that it was going to be something big about Pathfinder, or, you know, that it was going to be like a second edition or something like that, and it turns out that it's this whole brand new science fantasy game that nobody expected and came out of left field, I think, for the public. And so we just had this long period before everybody knew what it was, but while we were creating the game and working on the core rulebook and doing the design of it, in which you know, we're doing all of these brand new things, and we're really excited because we're creating new classes that are new play experiences, and having really engaging with a very difficult design parameters and expectations about, you know, what do you need to do in a D20 system that is based on a Pathfinder chassis to make it appropriate for a far future setting, and then making all the decisions about the canon as well when that's happening. Back when James Sutter was our creative director, currently is, you know, it's Rob McCreary, but we were doing a lot of behind the scenes work and having to keep very quiet about it and try to make sure that, you know, nobody really got wind before we were able to direct that messaging to the public. So it was really exciting. It was brand new ground that was being tread, and it was also a little bit nerve-wracking because we all sort of thought, like, well, we've never, you know, done this before, so we want to do the best that we can, but we also can't talk about it. So, you know, we have to kind of like continue just to internally playtest and do stuff until the public can get their eyes on it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so it was very fun, but it was also just kind of a pressure cooker of, you know, can we do this right, and can we do this without, you know, spilling the beans, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously we're fans of Starfinder. That's why we do this podcast. Now, how is it? Now, how is the Starfinder team? How is life with working on Starfinder different from life back when you all were working on Pathfinder primarily?
Well, for me personally, I was doing different things when I was working on Pathfinder. So basically, a little bit of history. I was on the original Starfinder design team, the core design team that's listed in the core rulebook, the ones that put together the game's engine and you know, all of its tactical roles, all of its equipment, all of the things that you need to know to play the game at the table. That's, you know, what we created. And then after that project was over, I moved back to Pathfinder, and I ran like the campaign setting line and the player companion line for quite a while. Then I was doing some development coordination, in which I was additionally putting together teams to work on those types of projects. And then when it became clear that Starfinder needed some management outside of Pathfinder, that is when Eric Mona put me back on the Starfinder team, but in that managerial role. And so I've switched around quite a lot. I've worked with, I worked with creating the rules for Starfinder, then going back to Pathfinder, and then going back to Starfinder while still doing freelance for both lines. And so it's really helped me be just mentally very adept in going from fantasy to future and sci-fi, and just the back and forth that has to happen with that. But it's also very challenging, right? Because it is a different rule set, and I think keeping the two in my head, at times I have to double check myself. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer when I'm doing rules development to make sure, oh yeah, that's the way we changed it in Starfinder, right? Because, I'll remember that there's a debate, but I might not be confident that I remember what we decided. But playing the game also helps a lot with that. And so I've at least been able to avoid a lot of the bad pitfalls that might come from working on two different systems. But moving back onto Starfinder was really exciting for me, because and now I get to work on the game that I helped create, which is a very fulfilling thing. And also, we are solving challenges of problems that don't exist, in Pathfinder, for example. How are you dealing with, healing in a party that doesn't have any mystics? How are you dealing with gear and equipment and, environmental challenges that just don't exist in Pathfinder? So it's very fun to sort of face those kind of head on and be able to get back into answering some of those questions.
Mm-hmm. And so far, the Starfinder releases have been a lot of what we expected, even if a little bit out of order, and have expanded sort of what the game has already established with the core rulebook. We've got the Alien Archive, obviously, the second Alien Archive. The setting got expanded in Packed Worlds, and then the equipment got expanded in Armory.
Yep.
But you all have announced a new book, which seems to be potentially the most exciting and expansion that the game has going to get to date.
Yes, I believe you are talking about the Character Operations Manual. Is that it, Param?
I hope so, because otherwise my notes are really
wrong. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Now, can you give us a brief overview? I know a lot of the details haven't been finalized on that, but what is the Character Operations Manual?
Sure. So if you think about the Character Operations Manual in the way that you think about the Advanced Player's Guide for Pathfinder, for those of you who are familiar with that, it fits a very similar role in the expansion of the core options for the game. So whereas the Advanced Player's Guide has new classes for Pathfinder, the largest expansion of new classes for the Pathfinder engine, the Character Operations Manual also has new classes. Not as many, 3, but it also expands the character creation options and just options in general. There'll be new themes in the Character Operations Manual, which we call COM at the office for short. There will be some new feats, there'll be new spells, there will be pretty much any kind of choosable option that you have for classes or for your character. You'll have new options in the COM.
Now, a lot of us have said that Pathfinder didn't become Pathfinder until the Advanced Player's Guide was published. So are you all feeling the pressure here with COM?
Yeah, I think we kind of are, because the classes that existed in the core rulebook are a lot of kind of the low-hanging, obvious archetypical types of characters that you might want to play in a science fantasy game. In some cases, they have equivalents in Pathfinder or D&D, and so they're recognizable to people who are coming from that vector with their own RPG experience. You've got the mystic that's very similar to the cleric. You've got the soldier that's very similar to the fighter. You've got the technomancer that's kind of similar to a wizard. You can make comparisons. The envoy with the bard. The only one that you really can't is Solarian, which is sort of the one that's like easing people into, okay, here's a brand new concept of a science fantasy class that isn't an equivalent to something else that you've seen in another game. But I do think that because we filled those niches, now we definitely had the opportunity to pitch what do we think is cool, what do we think is purely Starfinder that fits into the play experience that we're going for with people. We're out of the realm of we have to port over, another class from Pathfinder, from a different, type of archetype from the genre. So, we really had the opportunity to sort of go wild with the types of concepts that we were pitching. We, in general, when we came up with what you see in the playtest, talked about what sort of combat roles and what sort of party roles, for lack of a better word, we wanted to fill and that we felt like that there was a need for. But the actual concepts of the classes we do feel like are very uniquely Starfinder and fit into the type of game that we're wanting to play. So we have a lot of opportunity, but like you said, there's a little bit of pressure because you know, we're not hanging our hats on something that already existed. These are all pretty new.
Do you have like a secret drawer in your desk at work where you're like, all of the classes that we pitched but didn't choose, here you are for the future?
I certainly have notes from very early design meetings in which we narrow down what 3 sort of roles did we want. We knew that we wanted a tank type of class, which is going to be the Vanguard that you'll see in the playtest. We knew that we wanted a scientist type of class. We probably knew that we wanted it to have 2 different paths and be sort of a mad scientist or an academic scientist. We knew that we wanted a full spellcaster that was charisma-based because the game was missing that from a mechanics perspective. But outside of that, we threw all sorts of ideas at each other. We had a design workshop at Gen Con in which we passed out NDAs and had people talk about what they thought would be cool. And of course, you know, they didn't know that we were going to be doing this, but we thought, you know, that would be a good idea to sort of see if there was any like large overlapping concepts that people thought were really neat, and then we sort of just went from there. So, you know, secret drawer, not really, but I do definitely have some of the crazy ideas that we talked about early on.
So, going through the classes that were announced and are currently in playtest right now, for those of you who don't know or missed our last episode, there's a playtest going on until January 6th. Is that the correct date?
16th.
16th. Extra days until January 16th to test the classes and get the feedback in. So please do that. These playtests are super important. So we've got a good preview of these. So let's start with the Biohacker, your mad science. So what can you tell us about the Biohacker?
All right. So the Biohacker is it is a class that does have 2 branching paths. You can be a wisdom-based biohacker or an intelligence-based biohacker, and what key ability score you choose affects some of your class abilities. But essentially, the biohacker is somebody who creates injections, what's called injections. They are usable within injection weapons, and you have class features that allow you to be a little better proficient with them, be able to be a little more effective in loading your injections into them. And so they have counter agents and restoratives, basically the 2 basic types of injections that you get as a biohacker. Counter agent is something that is a debuff, basically, on a creature. And when you use it, starting at first level, you have 3 different options, and then as you level up, you get different theorems and things, and fields of study sort of based on what type of science your character is studying. And then the second type of injection is restorative, which is a type of injection that aids a creature, and so it's going to buff either you or your allies, and then you have different options in that same way that you do with the debuff. And so really the Biohacker is about creating a lot of different real-time options in combat, allow you to have a lot of different choices of what you are able to do based on the situation that's going on. So a lot of the options that you'll see through the choices of the class, the theorems, are going to be about making yourself better in sort of play style that you've cultivated through this Biohacker. And we anticipate that the play styles that are encouraged by the Biohacker will be affected by the different party members, so what other different party members are doing. You know, maybe you just want to stand back and buff them and help protect them while they're on the front lines, or you know, if you want to be on the front lines yourself, it's not going to be the greatest idea, but it is going to be doable, because then you can debuff the creatures that you're fighting and sort of be able to affect the outcomes of battles in that way. So of course, you know, injection weapons in the past have been very good for healing, but we wanted to really open up the options for that. There are some new injection weapons that showed up in Armory. There will probably be new injection weapons showing up in other products, including this one. And so we really wanted to capture that flavor of a scientist who's either very studious and methodical and focused on their work, and in that way, you know, they're able to turn sort of battle in their favor or help their allies, or sort of just a mad scientist, anything goes, know how far they can push the limits of themselves. That's the wisdom-based biohacker, and kind of be able to throw caution to the wind and be effective in that manner as well. So it's really sort of all about choice and the role-playing aspect that you want to play for your biohacker.
So, since it's all about choice, which field of study would you choose for your biohacker?
You know, I kind of go back and forth on that, honestly. I was a health and science writer for quite a long time, and so I really am very fascinated by academics, and sort of used, as I developed this class, used a little bit of my background in knowing different types of sciences to write some of the flavor text or work in some of the flavor text, or really just sort of affect Jason Keeley's really excellent core design a little bit. So, you know, I sort of lean a little bit toward the studious biohacker, which is going to be the wisdom modifier, just kind of the crazy sort of mad scientist, but I think maybe deep down I'm a little bit more methodical, so I might actually be instinctive. I think the first biohacker that I might make for play outside of the office will be instinctive. Let's just put it that way.
There's some overlay in like theme between the Pathfinder Alchemist and the Starfinder Biohacker, but in playing with it at the table, it doesn't feel like that. Was there any special design considerations to help separate the two as an idea?
You know, I don't think we made any specific decisions to separate it, but we knew that that a space alchemist actually was a pretty popular request that people were talking about. We had seen it online. It was mentioned a few times in our design workshop at Gen Con, and so we knew that there was interest in that. So we wanted to open it up. We wanted to open up the biohacker for that type of play, but we did not want to make a space alchemist. We very specifically wanted to stay away from that type of trope. So, you know, you can build it kind of in that way, but we wanted it to feel specifically a little bit more Starfinder rather than just alchemist in space, you know, with science, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because the problem that you see with the alchemist is a lot of the builds are really similar in Pathfinder because they're based around kind of dumping wisdom and making everything great.
Yeah.
And seeing this at the table, it's been way different in a positive way.
Yeah, that's good to hear, and you know, that's what kind of the playtest is about as well. Is getting information about, you know, is there one field of study that's clearly a lot worse than the rest of them that just doesn't make sense in practical play for people to take? Is there one that's a lot better that, you know, would be ridiculous to take anything else because it's so good? You know, we really want to even that out as much as possible so that, you know, you're not punished for making a choice that you want to from a role-playing perspective. We want you to make, you know, Starfinder from the very beginning has been all about making the type of character you want to play, not about party composition, not about, you know, being able to be effective in combat, not about, you know, dealing damage with spells. We really want you to be able to make your character that you envision in your head, and so that's the goal with this as well.
Nice.
I'm curious why the decision to focus on the injection weapons so clearly. Like, where was that decided?
So we started out by thinking a little bit, beginning with the DNA of the alchemist, in that this is a character that is making concoctions, putting together scientific, you know, compounds and mixtures to be able to do things that affect creatures, sort of like a mutagen might be, right? But then that would be, you know, just yourself, unless you've, you know, got the alchemist discovery to give that to your friends. But so we started out with, okay, well, how would a scientist administer these types of concoctions? Well, they would do it probably with some kind of injection, and so the core injection class feature is actually, you know, you have a syringe and you've got your mixtures that you can make on the fly that you prepare in the morning, and then you grab them after, you know, taking your action to do it, and you've got it in your hand, and you know, administer it to yourself, administer it to your allies. You can run up to a creature and stab them with it if you want. We really wanted to make sure that we weren't punishing people for getting up into melee like that, if that was their choice. And so the injection weapons really just made sense, especially because we had added some in Armory. We wanted there to be a more viable option for using that stuff at range. And I know, like, part of the debates fairly early on, and even a little bit currently, is, you know, is it effective enough that you have a ranged option to administer these injections? Are we not forcing you to put yourself in harm in a way that the class is not intended to be able to handle, just so that you can use your core class feature, because the injection is really the core of the concept there.
So how... Oh, go Go ahead,
I was
Alex.
gonna say, man, I really hope the biohacker is using different syringes for every shot. That's really gross if they're like, haha, here's my one lucky syringe. And you, and you, and you. Although that would be a really good space goblin with biohacker. There's only one syringe.
It depends on your alignment.
Yeah, it's pretty open for flavor, but we had sort of talked about having it almost be like a little belt clip of vials with a whole bunch of liquid and, you know, little push buttons in them, and so it's almost like a little bat clip on the belt, and when you're in battle you just go aha, and then it like just puts it into its syringe that pops out, you know, the bottom, because science, and then you've got it in your hand and you can run up and stab someone with it.
You've got like one of those like across the shoulder utility belts, and you press a button.
Yeah.
One of those little snow cone color dye, and you're just like,
Yeah, especially the wisdom-based biohacker, the mad scientist biohacker, just having these bandoliers of all different syringes and just kind of pushing buttons on them to be able to make the concoctions, and only he knows which way to, you know, which order to push the buttons in. Is really just sort of a fun thing to think about and play.
I just realized it sounded a lot like Rick from Rick and Morty now. I didn't think of that before.
I have seen that question being asked, I think, more than once on the playtest forums, that it was like, did you guys just want to make Rick from Rick and Morty? And it's like, not really, but I guess you could if you wanted to.
Yeah,
I could see a case for him being a witch warper as well.
Yeah, our comparison, at least between me and Alex, is Anna from Overwatch, who uses a long rifle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna is a good example of, you could build her as a biohacker, and it would make sense.
So, this is currently in the playtest. Has there been anything so far that you've learned about the class through the playtest?
I think that we are watching very carefully the amount, the number of usages, especially at first level of the injections. You know, one thing that we sort of went back and forth on is if you miss with a ranged attack with one of your injections, should lose that injection for the day. Is that consumed? And from a verisimilitude standpoint, we all sort of figured, yes, you probably have to, but then, you know, that's one of a very limited number of uses per day of this core class feature that you have, and so we're really looking at making sure that playing the class and the fun things that make the biohacker is actually viable, you know, in a full adventuring day, and that it's not going to be frustrating to run out of those resources as well. We are looking at really sort of everything, but like I mentioned, you know, the fields of study, making sure that you know, that they all do things that are useful in a similar way from a power level, that it makes sense when it's tied to its flavor, the restoratives and the counter agents that you're getting, and just that the theorems are all varied enough. That, you know, they would be useful, that all of them would in some way be useful, just depending on the way that you're playing the class.
Out of curiosity, do you see the biohacker as being like, I'm as good as a mystic at healing, or should they be kind of like an off healer, sort of like how in Overwatch not every character is as good at throwing healing orbs as Moira?
Yeah, you know, it's really intended to be an off healer. We really were paying attention to not stepping on the mystic's toes and making it a better healer than the mystic, because we want that role to still be what the mystic does best. But that said, you can build a healing biohacker. You know, it doesn't get Mystic Cure, for example, so you're probably not going to be able to heal as much, but there's a play style in which you could perhaps be on par with a Mystic, but we are really trying to, like you said, looking through the playtest to make sure that, you know, you're just not going to be a straight-out better healer than a Mystic, because that's not the intention.
Okay. So let's move on to the next class on the list.
Sure.
That is going to be the Vanguard, alphabetically. You said you were designing a tank.
Yes, so the Vanguard was designed by Joe Pacini, one of our Starfinder developers. It is a super cool class that is intended to be a tank, and specifically it talks about a juggernaut brimming with fundamental energies, and the flavor at the very beginning of the class, right up in the playtest document. The Vanguard uses the entropic forces, the inevitable decay of the galaxy, to be able to manipulate the terrain around the character and be able to make entropic strikes, and is really intended to be good at hand-to-hand combat and proficient in shields, and being able to sort of protect not only himself or herself as a character, but all of the other characters as well. And if you've been through the class, you notice that there are abilities that really are geared toward the Vanguard sort of stepping in front of taking damage and specifically putting themselves in harm's way and being able to do things when they are themselves starting to lose hit points or starting to, fall in danger to protect the people around them. So it is very much a tank and a damage soaker and a front lines fighter type of class.
Mm-hmm. Now the concept
it definitely feels that. Sorry, go ahead, Per.
It does. The concept of having a tank in a game isn't new, and Starfinder certainly could have benefited from having a melee-focused character. There are melee builds right now. What does seem odd is tying the tank to the entropic decay of the universe. Where did that decision, why make that so flavorful? Where did that come from?
You're breaking up just a little bit on the
audio.
Oh
no, I'm so sorry. I was saying that the melee and the tank part, those are obviously design choices and tropes. What is unique to this class is tying it thematically to the entropic decay of the universe. Why did that decision get made?
So that is that was really the brainchild of Joe. That was really he and the rest of us. Once he pitched it to us, we were very enamored with the idea of being able to harness just this sort of unknowable, inhuman force of nature, and being able to redirect it in ways and control it in ways that allow you to, do things like protect people. We're really interested in the dichotomy between destruction and decay, and black holes and suns dying, and planets crumbling, and harnessing sort of that into your own power of will and your own being, and being able to really direct that in key small ways. It's just a little tiny bit of the force that's behind a black hole, but if you have your handle on that sort of power, what you could do with it, we felt like is really a strong and compelling type of protective character. And it's really, we thought, very interesting to see, what were some ways that we could tie some of the mechanics back to that concept. And so that's where you're going to see specifically the use of resolve points, as the Vanguard is taking damage and starting to absorb more of that stuff. The tank abilities that it gets are really designed to mimic that sort of control of that force.
It definitely feels like a very anime heavily inspired class, just shouting, "The collapsing of stars fuels my rage" is enough to be like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, we really I expect the next time I walk through the halls at Gen Con and somebody's playing a Vanguard, it'll be next year, right, because the book's not going to be out until later, but to hear just at least a couple of shouts of Kamehameha when somebody's using an entropic strike or something other, sort of explodey type abilities. So it wasn't really intended to mimic anything specific from anime, but it's very tropey in that, sort of very cinematic kind of sense of what a tank can do.
But it's interesting in the design space, because instead of doing your typical tank things where you're just like, I have more hit points, you have to hit me, by harnessing that supernatural force of it, you can do some just weird things that are really fun to do when somebody goes, wait, you can help me with this? You can buff this out?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think adding shields and then the shield proficiency and making that really a core part of the design, the initial design of the Vanguard, was also a way that we really thought the class could feel unique, because, well, one, shields didn't exist, right, before this playtest came out, but also just the idea of a character, who's got one arm out, crackling with the energy of the entropic strike and the decay of the universe, and the other with a big shield up, like Brigitte from Overwatch, just sort of advancing on the enemy. That was a very compelling visual to us as we were talking about what we wanted this class to be able to do and the way we wanted people to play it. I think when I was sort of talking about that and really talking up, shields would be great, I had in my head, I think it was the trailer for one of the Star Wars games that came out. It might have been the Star Wars MMO or something, but there's this cinematic where you see these soldiers sort of advancing with their shields up, and then there's all of these laser shots coming up, and it's that would be so cool to be able to do that in Starfinder. So that was really sort of the feel that we were going for with that.
You know, someone in our Twitch feed, Targ8 Practice, points out, he says, Skittermander Vanguards are hilarious. They just want to give hugs. And I think that's really interesting because to me, that's like commenting on the fact that like Skittermanders get a bonus to grapple maneuvers. And the Vanguard is interesting in that it's the first class that's like, hey, you know, these combat maneuvers, like, we do stuff with these.
Yeah. The Vanguard is very up in your face, and I think that there's a really interesting character concept with the Skittermander there. To have a Skittermander who he's just kind of like flying at the bad guy, screaming, "I'm helping," while he's got his entrapment. I really hope that those characters come into the world, because I think that's really cool.
It's interesting because like with the way that Starfinder races are designed, there are a bunch that just have these like great bonuses to combat maneuvers, and you're like, that's never going to matter. Then you look at the Vanguard, and it's like, wait, my combat maneuver goes against EAC.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bolita with the Bull Rush and the reposition.
I feel like the Pharaons from the second AP volume have something like that too. The squat dudes are from the moon with like the sun that's turning into a black hole or whatever. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of them. Trucks have a grapple bonus, so like you could have this adorable little Skittermander who just wants to give you grapple hugs, or you could have this horrifying horrifying Trox who's just like, I will crush you beneath the weight of my carapace. People,
give me a hug.
Feel your bones crack. It is the entropy of reality pressing against you. And it's like, oh God, please, Mr.
Like,
Shots.
Steve, do you always have to be so dramatic? I mean, come on.
That's his name. It's Steve. Steve,
come on. Steve, please.
Yeah, it's great.
Now,
the shield.
Now, this is a tank character, and those have been traditionally very hard to get tanks working all right in, especially in tabletop role-playing game where you have the infinite possibility of strategy available to you. How do you make tanks work? So how do the Vanguards make being a tank actually work? Make people want to hurt them?
Well, so, you know, really I think giving them the additional reaction that they get, and I think it kicks in at 3rd level, and giving them more abilities, I think, than any of the other playtest classes that key off of resolve points. When you have taken damage, when you have become hurt, really incentivizes you to not only be up on the front lines, but to be trying to take that aggro, for lack of a better term, trying to, you know, taunt the bad guys into fighting you, because you are actually incentivized for taking damage. You are incentivized for, you know, possibly even having to make the decision, like, do I continue to stay up here when I might drop? Or do I step back and, you know, somehow try to heal myself, or, you know, go over to the Mystic or whatever it is. And so I think that incentivizing you to take that sort of damage really opens up some interesting questions of play. And I think we'll see a lot of people start to toe the line, if we aren't already, in some of the SFS versions of the playtest of, you know, how far can I go with this tank character to continue to draw this damage. Wow, I might be in trouble myself. And so I think that was really how we approached trying to make a tank work, was that incentivizing and, you know, really sort of nudging and encouraging that type of just decision and, you know, calling your bluff, I suppose, when you're starting damage.
Is that why there are a bunch of options in the Vanguard? Like, I can't remember what the name of the even level powers they choose are, but
the disciplines.
The disciplines. Is that why there are a bunch that encourage you to wear light armor instead of heavy armor? Like,
it's really to make you more mobile, right? So that you can just.
Well, I was thinking that if you're wearing light armor, you're more likely to get punched in the face and take that damage. Like, if you're wearing, because if you're wearing a shield and heavy armor and you have a higher bonus, that kind of makes it less likely you'll take damage, which means it's less likely that you'll get entropy points. So if you're running around wearing no armor because you have your evasion, it's like, aha, I have all the points now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that entropic pool, you know, having that key off actually literally taking damage is really sort of the main mechanism there. You know, in addition to the disciplines and things that you can use resolve points for, you know, that's really what is being incentivized to build up that entropy, those entropy points. You know, see how much damage you can actually take before you can do the cool thing.
You know, you laugh at me, James. This class really reminds me of, like, I can't think of his name because the movie came out forever ago, but the awesome monk in Rogue One, where he's like, I am one with the Force. The Force is with me.
Oh,
and, like,
absolutely.
people beat him up, and then he's just like, I'm gonna destroy you now.
Yeah, Donnie Yen's character, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So moving on to the last class of the playtest, and the one I think we'll spend the most time on because you wrote it.
I did.
The Witch Warper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us everything, all of the
Sure.
Yes. So why is it awesome?
So why is it awesome? Okay, well, I'm biased, but I think it's pretty cool. Because so the Witch Warper is, from a mechanical standpoint, it is our full casting class in the playtest. It's charisma based, like I had mentioned. It's got the same spell progression and spells per day, bonus spells as the Technomancer. And sort of digressing a little bit, at the end of the playtest document, there's a few new Witch Warper spells that are a little bit of a taste of the flavor of the types of things that this class is doing, pulling from alternate realities to create slightly different situations to use in their favor. Basically, there's a new cantrip in there called Charming Veneer. There's a Witch Warper version of Wish and Miracle called, I believe, Alter Reality or Warp Reality. And the class is filling that mechanical niche of the charisma-based full spellcaster. We knew from the very beginning we always wanted one of these to be a full spellcaster. But beyond that, the concept of the class is something that I personally find very cool. And it is actually based on a real scientific theory called the theory of infinite worlds. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. So it's a real theory in theoretical physics. And it hinges on the idea that there are an infinite number of parallel universes that exist, and that we only live in one version, but there are infinite numbers sort of beyond the veil of this current reality, in which there are slight differences, variations in what actually exists, the situations that people are in, and the environment around them. And so, there's a version of reality, Alex, in which you have blonde hair. There's a version of reality. Yeah. Wow, you said that. I mean, but there's versions of reality in which, everything is exactly the same as this one, except for everybody has a different hair color. There's a version of reality in which, you didn't necessarily maybe make that choice in your life that you did 10 years ago that set you on the path to your current things, or that, your job is slightly different, or that you're born into a slightly different situation in your family. And so that things are along permutations of different versions of reality.
I wonder if there's...
Go ahead.
I was going to make a joke. I was going to say, I wonder if there's an alternate version of reality where I'm better than James at Overwatch.
There probably is, and there's also probably an alternate reality in which, James owns Blizzard and therefore can do whatever he wants in Overwatch because he's the boss.
This is a bad time for Blizzard, James.
It's a nightmare.
Sell it.
You'd be a tyrant, wouldn't you, James? You'd just be the worst tyrant. You just ban all of us, right? Because we annoy you.
Hammers all day.
No, so obviously you can't say anything for what alternate James would be like, but if modern James was running Blizzard, he would just not want any part of it. It's too much work. He would have other people make all the decisions, and he'd just give them the thumbs up when they did a good job, and reprimand when they didn't. I know you. I know what you would do.
You would just have a giant office with a chocolate fountain waterfall in the background, and 40 assistants who all come in and give him.
Hey, delegation is an important part of management.
That's right.
Man, we went from the worst timeline where I'm better at Overwatch than you to the best timeline where everybody waits on you.
Is the boss of Blizzard.
Speaking of managing timelines, more about the Witch Warper.
So the Witch Warper is based on that set of scientific theories, and so really it all sort of builds from there. In that the Witch Warper is born with an innate connection, understanding of not only the existence of all of these parallel realities, but in fact the ability to see into one or more of them, depending on how high level you are, but how good you are at understanding and seeing everything all at once, and making subtle changes to the environment largely around them, but also to themselves, or sort of draping a little palimpsest of a certain other reality on top of a situation or another character or themselves, and just manipulating not only people's perception of what reality is, but actually changing reality itself for just a split second for as long as their magic lasts. And so you know, of course, that's how they do their spells. They use magic to be able to reach into those other realities and make those changes like I described. But, you know, they also have inherent abilities, like the Infinite Worlds ability is the core, fairly massive from a text perspective ability that continues to scale up as the Witch Whipper gains levels and theoretically becomes better at controlling these different types of realities and can do different things for a period of time. That's the core class feature that I feel like really makes the Witch Whipper and speaks to that concept even more so than like its specific spells, for example.
With the Witch Whipper and its design idea, how hard is it to sometimes just when you're sitting there thinking about abilities where you just go, I wish this person was dead. Let's find that reality. Like, where do you draw the boundary and power level on that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And a lot of people have sort of skipped to that right away. They're like, well, if I understand every single reality and I can, you know, take things from every single reality, why can't I just decide that that starship never existed? Or why can't I just decide that that monster's insides are on its outsides and, oh, look, now it's dead? And the answer to that, you know, is from, of course, a mechanical perspective, that's not fun, right? That's not fun to be able to just get an I win button. And we really did not want to make this the I win class. We wanted to make this a class with infinite power potential, but is a character that's really kind of coming into their own, which is why you see the limited uses of Infinite Worlds at first level, the limited utility of it, which frankly we're looking at because I'm worried it might be a little too limited at first level, but it's why you're sort of seeing like natural progressions with additional things that you can do in stronger spells, because you know, we didn't want to make something, like you said, that's just so powerful and just jumps right from A to Z as far as, you know, I understand, therefore I can do everything. That's not necessarily, that's not the way really magic works. And so even though this is a science-based concept, it's also not the way that the class's features work either, because magic is involved. They are using magic to pull from these alternate realities. They are not actually creating them or, you know, pulling them through science from their world into this world. They are actually using magic. So
and I mean, even with that, there's a lot of really fun ones. Like there's the one where it's like, I'm going to pull you from an alternate reality where you're like 5 feet shorter.
The resizing creatures one that makes you bigger, and there's one that makes you smaller. I think some of my favorite Witch Whipper paradigm shifts are actually the ones that are the most subtle, but the ones that have potentially the most utility. So like Shift Grenade, for example, is the one that can just, you know, snap your fingers when you see somebody having thrown a grenade and move it 5 feet over to one side. Sounds on the surface maybe a little bit lame, but when your ally has thrown a grenade and 5 foot over means a difference between affecting one creature with radius to affecting 3 or 4 creatures with the radius, that's a pretty big deal. And so, you know, again, going a little bit back to the philosophy for the Biohacker, really making it situational and keeping you sort of mentally on your toes and watching what's happening around you and predicting what might happen is a core part of the Witch Whipper. And it also speaks to its concept as well, because not only, you know, can the Witch Whipper look into other different realities and see the potential for what could happen in this reality, but the Witch Whipper also can look just a little bit ahead in this reality, because the future from the Witch Whipper's perspective is a little bit of a different reality. And so it's sort of, it's all relative to the Witch Whipper. And so there's an ability called Compound Sight that lets you, you know, kind of see a little bit into the future about, you know, how is the skill check going to go for me, and be able to get sort of bonuses for those types of things.
I know at the table I ran, the one that was like really good. There's one where it's like, if your ally takes damage, you spend a resolve point, and then you treat the roll as if it were minimum. And over the course of this one really tough fight, they ended up saving like 100 points in damage doing that. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so it's all of these things that are like, well, that's, you know, that's cool, but that's not really super powerful and useful. You know, my hope, and of course the playtest will really bear this out, is that in play you'll start to see how valuable those things really are when you use them in just the right situation, when they come up for you over and over. That's why you've chosen that paradigm shift. That's why that's valuable to you, not necessarily because of the one little thing it can do, but the things that it can do that add up over time.
So besides we've talked about like some of the flavor, and you said that the mechanical would be a charisma-based caster, but besides just using charisma, what mechanical niche role does it does it serve? Like, how is its spellcasting rules-wise different from the other casters?
Well, so in Starfinder we don't have schools, and so magic is just sort of magic. So we didn't necessarily have a need for like, oh, this needs to be a divine caster, this needs to be an arcane caster, an occult caster. So it was really all about the flavor of how they're able to cast their spells, as opposed to the specific mechanics of what schools and stuff are going on, or what types of casting is going on there. So, you know, they're all spontaneous, so you don't really have to worry about, okay, am I making a prepared caster? Did we need a prepared caster in Starfinder? So really, I think that because we had the Technomancer on the purely technical magic side, and we had Mystic on the purely mystical magic side, that the Witchworker had a lot of middle room that it could occupy. And I think there's a lot of room for a lot of different types of casters. And I say that being somebody who just really likes magic in general, and so I can come up with all sorts of ideas. And in fact, when I pitched the Witchwarper to a number of people, including to our publisher Eric Mona, I kind of thought, well, I think that this is cool, but is this going to be considered too niche? You know, are they going to want something that's a little bit more broadly kind of applicable from a conceptual standpoint? And the feedback that people were giving sort of roundly was like, no, this is a very like Starfinder kind of unique, cool concept that does fit in that middle ground between the Technomancer and the Mystic. And so I kind of think of it as a little bit of an occult flavor. It's a little bit less understandable and explainable than the Technomancer is, who, you know, does use magic to affect machines and can talk with machines and can, you know, magically put together stuff from different components, like all the junk bots, which are our personal favorite suite of spells of mine. But on the other side, you know, not also being like the Mystic, who is using, you know, the force of the universe to sort of like heal people and do kind of traditional divine style magic. But the Witchwarper is this difficult to understand type of character, getting their power from something that a lot of other characters and NPCs are probably not going to be able to recognize as any specific types of casting. So I really in my head think that this that the Witchwarper does sort of sit in this kind of strange, unknowable sort of romantic notion of a caster that, you know, don't try to understand what I do, just experience and appreciate the results. Very much kind of a Witchwarper attitude, I think.
That sounds like a very charisma-based attitude to me.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the like an esoteric like Harrower or something like that, like along that type of line of magic.
Yeah, where, you know, if somebody were Witchwarper, how do you get your abilities? They'd say, you know, well, I'd explain it to you, but I see that in this reality you can't quite comprehend it. Maybe in a different one, read this book and come back to me, you know. And so it's very theoretical and sort of very out there, and not all Witchwarpers necessarily have to be like that, but I think it would be fun to play a character who is very assured in the fact that, you know, their abilities are strange and unknowable and not quite understandable, and, you know, are really just to be sort of like done and then appreciated.
Yeah, kind of like if you try to measure it, it changes the result type thing, where it's like, this is just what it needs to be when it needs to be.
They're the witch doctor from Princess and the Frog, where he's like, if you just relax, it'll enable me to do whatever I want. Yeah. It's literally a line from his evil villain song in them.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential for Witchwarpers to be, you know, very good-hearted individuals who are using their abilities, you know, to affect positive change and to help their allies and to stop evildoers. There's also a lot of potential for some of the darker, more nebulous characters to become Witchwarpers, because, you know, you could see that there could be a lot of egomania in a type of caster like that. So it could be really fun to sort of play a character who, you know, thinks they have this grip, and in fact they do have this grip on all these different realities, but then, you know, maybe meet their match in different interesting ways from the other party members. So I think there's just a lot of cool potential there.
Yeah,
definitely. Do you think that the existence of alternate realities in Starfinder is something that you ever play with more in the future in like adventure paths or design?
Well, there are certainly going to be quite a few new Witchwarper spells, even in the character operations manual, and those will, some of them will be Witchwarper only spells, some of them will be spells that, you know, the Mystic or the Technomancer can access as well, just depending on what the spells do. But they will all be flavored, especially, well, the Witchwarper only spells will certainly be flavored in the way that you see some spells in playtest, where it's like, this is specifically alternate reality, or you are specifically changing something about, you know, the type of energy damage this weapon does, or this type of creature, or what this creature's abilities are, things like that. You know, really the design space, I think, for the spells of the Witch Warper, at least the way that I did them, or the way that I approached them, was that it would be a concept of paradigm shift, but is a little more, and you know, I think should really take a few more resources to be able to do what the spell is doing, not the level that the spell is doing it.
Is there any chance for a spell, probably high level, that will let me trade seats with another player playing the same adventure I am in a convention slot?
You mean literally let you change seats?
Changing my reality.
I mean, if you want, I can write you a shifting chair spell, Param, instead of shifting step, the paradigm shift.
No. What you got to do is you just got to go to Thirsty, fly out to Canada, sit behind his chair, and be like, "Write this boon for me. Write this boon for me." I'm not talking about you, Param. I'm talking about Amanda. Amanda's like, she's the manager. She could do that to Thirsty. Write this boon. There's only two in existence, Thirsty. It's balanced. Yeah, I would.
Paizo North just revolts.
I was kind of asking, like, if alternate realities were going to be a thing you were going to touch on, like, from a story perspective in Adventure Paths, like. You
know, I think that there's a lot of potential that we could. We don't currently have plans to do that, but because we do have so much narrative freedom in the Adventure Paths that Starfinder does, you know, we've already done a horror themed AP a lot faster than we did with Pathfinder. So. Yeah, I really think that there will be that type of theme at some point, and that will really give the Witch Warper an opportunity to shine. Yeah. But the challenge with that is making sure that we don't specifically write a story that is really only for Witch Warpers, or that Witch Warpers are clearly going to be the best characters, because you know, we don't want it to be not fun for the characters.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, certainly, you know, confirming that exists in the universe of Starfinder opens a lot of potential for APs.
Yeah, it's super cool, and like, you know, just off the top of my head, wow, answering the question whether or not the gap is like across all realities or only a few of them is like, what? Mind blown. I'm excited to hear what kind of new stories these new classes open up for you guys to tell.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we're getting close. So one last question before we go to the shout outs is, how has the playtest feedback from society, since we brought it up, like, how's that been? This is the first time you all have got to interact with the playtest in society. How's that worked out?
Yeah, so it's a pretty short playtest period, which is sort of unfortunate because it doesn't give folks a ton of time to do it, especially with the holidays in there. But we really felt like it was very important to get the aspect of organized play, you know, specifically because table variation is not intended to be a thing in Starfinder Society or Pathfinder Society, for example. So we really thought that the data and the anecdotes that we would get from Starfinder Society would be very solid and very sort of actionable, you know, from a standpoint of what the reporting is. And so it was important for us to try to find any way that we could to involve Starfinder Society in the playtest, and I'm glad that we did. As far as the actual results, you know, I've been talking with Thirsty a little bit about some of the things that he's been seeing on the ground, and some of the types of characters specifically that people are creating. Lots of people are very excited about the Biohacker and are giving us a lot of really interesting information about like scenarios and situations that have come up that we didn't necessarily anticipate, but that we know we probably want to address when the playtest is over, you know, before the final versions of the class come out. So, you know, the big value has been hearing from people, encountering situations that, you know, might be kind of a corner case, but the fact that it came up in organized play means that it's a pretty serious thing and that we have to, you know, address it in a mechanical way. And so that, you know, I've gotten some specific things, but in general, that's been my takeaway, is to pay very careful attention to that as it comes up.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amanda. That's been a fantastic interview. Definitely glad to get these perspectives on the classes. Some exciting times, and I will say that when we were speculating on what classes would be added to Starfinder, none of us thought of these. So you stumped us in a good way. I'm having fun playtesting them myself. Witch Warper is currently my favorite. But
awesome.
But I'm a Caster fan, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody here.
I was going to say, I assume you're just saying that because I'm sitting right here, but it's okay. I'll take it.
Oh, no, it's on record. You can see it. Also, you should also take some pride in when these were first announced and we read the excitement polls of our fans, which Warper outpaced everybody else by 2.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so everybody seems to. Now, after the playtest, it seems that the Vanguard has taken lead, but you got that initial search. Good going.
Awesome.
So is there anything you'd want to shout out to or bring attention to besides the playtest and the comm?
Well, I really do want to encourage folks, if they haven't gotten an opportunity, and they will before the 16th, to make up a character, play a session if they can, if they haven't already. Get us feedback through the SurveyMonkey forums. The SurveyMonkey surveys are really the best metric to do that, because that's actual scientific data that we're using, that we're mining from those responses. They can also go onto the forums. StarfinderPlaytest.com is the landing page to find all of that stuff. So if you're out there and you're thinking about it and you have a few minutes, even if you can't play it, read through the classes, find one that interests you, make up a character, see what you think, give us feedback through whatever vector that works for you, because the more feedback we have, just the more robust that we can make sure that these classes are once we finally announce them. We do have the comm, which is coming later in the fall. We have a few other things, but I think that the biggest thing that I would like to bring to folks' attention, if they're not already aware, is the fact that our beginner box is out in April. Ooh. And that is going to be a very large release to encourage teaching folks, new folks, people who might be new to RPGs in general or at all. This will be a very streamlined entryway to get into Starfinder, to learn the rules are a little bit streamlined, similar to the Pathfinder beginner box. But the box has everything that you need to open it up, read through the manual, get started in 20 or 30 minutes, and actually run a real game of Starfinder. So if you've got a bunch of friends that you've always wanted to get into tabletop role-playing, if they like science fantasy, if they're interested in the concept of Starfinder, or they've just never played anything like it before, the beginner box would be a great product to bring them into the fold and to just make the hobby a little bit larger and a little bit more accessible to people. So we're very excited for that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I would also like to shout out to our other actual play podcast, Seasons Beatings. Everyone, please check it out. We had finished, the last episode has been released. It's our Christmas gift to our listeners, and if you want to hear several of our players have a lot of fun trying to save Christmas from Krampus, including some fantastic players. Alex is our GM. We have Luis Loza.
Cool.
As
Excellent.
One of our players. We have Jason Keeley as one of our players, myself as one of the players, and of course, Vanessa. Thank you so much for being the best stuffed teddy bear character that's ever saved Christmas from Krampus. Fantastic. Go check that out.
I mean, that's not what saved Christmas from Krampus. You and I know what saved Christmas from Krampus. But that last episode, man, is
yeah. We don't want to spoil it too much, but do go and check it out.
I won't. You can just hear me sigh as a GM in that last episode. Amanda, when Paizo is back in session, you gotta ask Louise about the last episode and what happened, and you'll get this big.
Oh, I will. I will. I can't wait to hear that story. It sounds great.
Yeah. We also want to thank, also shout out to our other actual play podcast, the one that's ongoing, Adventurous, where we just announced that from your team, Jason Keeley will be joining us as a permanent character host or character actor player.
Yeah, Jason's great.
Yeah, we don't know what he'll be playing yet, but we do know that he will be playing something that can handle melee combat because we desperately need it badly.
And he will have an excellent accent, I can guarantee you.
Absolutely.
He had a pretty great accent on Rangval.
Yeah.
Also, if you wish to find out more, also make sure you check out our Discord channel or our social network channel feeds, and you can find some of us there. And also, we'd like to thank our Patreon backers for funding the show and making sure that this can happen. It's only through your contributions that we're able to keep the production of our shows going, so we appreciate it. Amanda, where can people find more, follow you, follow more of your work, find out more about what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter, and that's a pretty good way to follow me. I post on there fairly frequently, not as much recently, but still pretty regularly. It's at Amanda Hamon on the twitter.com. And you can also find me on the Paizo website and just sort of various places around the net.
Any other shout-outs, gang?
Didn't Amanda do something recently that's really cool?
Oh, are you talking about 137?
I am.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out to that.
So, as I maybe have briefly mentioned at the top of this recording, I do still write quite a bit of Pathfinder on a freelance basis, and my adventure that I actually have here in front of me, so I was working on something else, number 137, The City Outside of Time, is Return of the Rune Lords number 5, and that dropped in December, and involves Rune Lord Belimarius and the Realm of Envy, and it's a fairly high-level, interesting, fun, I hope, adventure that is available through Paizo.com.
You like high-concept design, don't you?
What's that? You
like high-concept stuff. Like, your class warps reality, your adventure is a city that's outside of time.
Yeah, there is actually a you go into the city of Crystalline, which is in a time-locked demi-plane outside of actual time. You also go to the Shadow Plane at the very beginning of that adventure, and you go into a little tunnel in between realities, time-worn tunnel. For a fun little encounter there in the middle of that adventure. So, yeah, I do a lot of weird stuff.
That's good. No, weird stuff is fun.
I agree.
Weird stuff is the best.
Awesome.
Oh, thank you guys.
I'm sure that it is exceptionally lethal. I have very, very fond memories of almost getting dissolved into acid in your Starfinder.
Is that Splinter Worlds? Is that the infamous acid pit with the monster that's Freestyle that pulls you down in there? I love that. That's so much fun to run at conventions. I always just wait there at the table while they're like, "Oh, check out that acid pool," and it's like, "Yes, please do go check out that." Pinnacle grab.
Awesome.
Well, you're gonna have to write a new adventure to get people with now that you've said that on a recording.
Yeah, I need to do another Starfinder adventure here. At some point here, very, very shortly.
Well, it has certainly been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. Hope we get to have you on the show again soon. All right.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's fun.
All right, so until next time, go beyond with no direction.